Okay, so this is a former keynote, and it's pretty much Fed heavy because I wanted to sort of ask people what they've seen, what has changed over the years for them, things that they'd talked about previously in their keynotes. Looking back now, were they accurate, were they inaccurate, where'd they screw up, and what'd they get right? Where do they see going forward? And since information security seems to be moving really quickly nowadays, and we are really in the spotlight, we're getting a lot more attention than ever before. I think that's sort of a blessing and a curse. Maybe a curse in the sense that if everybody's hanging on every word you say, if you say the wrong thing, it's like, finally, this is my day in the sun, and you try to do everything in 15 minutes that you wanted to do for 15 years. That you're setting yourself up for disaster. So I think we have to be more careful now than ever before in how we portray ourselves and kind of the things we're saying. We've got their attention. Now we have to decide what to do with it. So let me start at the end with Tony Sager to introduce himself.
Sure.
Why don't you just take some time, talk about maybe your perspective a little bit, and then we'll move into a more conversational.
Okay, do you want just an intro first? Or
We'll talk about your intro. Just let's do intros first, and then kind of give more in depth.
Will do. Okay, good afternoon. My name's Tony Sager, and as of September, I'll be a 34-year veteran of the National Security Agency. Thank you. All of it in what we call information assurance today, so in the defensive mission at NSA. And I've spent that 34 years involved in security testing of one type or another, everything from cryptographic algorithms to product testing, and then out to and including operational testing like the NSA Red Teams and so forth. And over the last 5 years, I've had the honor of running the organization that does all that for the defensive mission at NSA. So my perspective is a little warped by having watched things break in a myriad number of ways. And probably the last 10 years of my life have been focused on how do we solve some of these problems that we have seen countless times over and over again. And when we come back, I'll talk a little bit. I was keynote in 2007 and talked about a number of things that we were doing around public standards and guidance and so forth. Thanks.
Great. Next we have Linton Wells.
So my name is Lynn Wells. I'm over at National Defense University, where I run a small center on technology and national security policy. Before that, I spent 16 years in the Office of Secretary of Defense, including a couple of years as DoD Chief Information Officer. I think my first time here was 2000, 2001, and I was just reflecting in the discussions here about not only how much has changed, but how much has remained the same in terms of how much more slowly the government is responding than the threat is evolving. So that's something I've talked about.
And finally, we have Bob Stratton.
Hi. I'm Bob Stratton. I'm an independent consultant out of the DC area. More recently, I was Director of Government Research at Symantec. I've done a couple of venture-funded and bootstrap security startups, and was a part of a novel experiment a while back to create a venture capital arm for the Central Intelligence Agency, which is now covering the whole intelligence community. So I guess part of my focus.
No, you got to talk about your early days.
Oh, well, yeah, there is that. I founded the security organization at UUNet, which was one of the first Tier 1 internet service providers. Had an audit and pen test consultancy.
Yeah, you did the first pure play security practice, the Wheel Group.
Yeah, first network IDS, commercial network IDS, which we sold to Cisco. Then I did a pen testing consultancy, which I sold to Cylink. So I guess I'm kind of the reluctant business semi-fed guy.
Well, and at one point, the one thing I like about Bob is at one point, almost all of Usenet went through his basement. Yeah. So thanks, Bob, for keeping Usenet running for all those years.
Well done. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was heating his house. Okay, so that's your perspectives. And so we'll go back now to Tony. And give you a little bit more time if there's any questions or things you want to flesh out. And then I'll start, we'll do that again with everybody a little bit more in depth now that we know your perspective. And then I'll tease out some questions and we'll open it up for audience participation and we'll just see what happens.
That sounds great, Jeff. Thanks.
So maybe talk a little bit about your previous keynote and maybe what's changed or how you see the role of what you're doing change. And
okay.
We're looking for big picture ideas here.
Well, let me summarize briefly the great opportunity that I had to come out and speak in 2007, both to Black Hat and DEF CON. And in a lot of ways, it was sort of a coming out party. That is, we were really going public with a lot of things that we had been doing. And again, have spent my life in the defensive side of this. And actually, we just celebrated a big 10th year anniversary at NSA. It was June 26th or 7th, I forget exactly when. But 10 years ago, that was the summer of 2001, we started releasing to the public security guidance at NSA through the public web presence. And I know that doesn't sound like much today, but that was a real culture changer for us, and convincing some really understanding bosses that I worked for that would be a good idea. That is to take guidance that we had been developing as an outgrowth of red and blue team testing and product testing for the DoD, putting it together in a more general and broadly usable form, and then just giving it away. And what I was seeing at that time, and this is the early 2000s, was, we all talk a good game about public-private partnership, and we're all on the same net, and we're trying to solve the same problem, but there isn't much work that's really aimed at solving the problem together. And the messaging that I was trying to get across was, we're part of the community, we're going to put our share out there for inspection. There were people looking for an NSA backdoor in it. I don't think anyone's found one yet. But the idea
that was a really good job you did hiding it.
We're incredible, I'll tell you. But the idea was, we have a shared problem, we need to share solutions, and the only way to do that was start putting things out there that we would just give away. And the point I made to my boss at the time, and he strongly endorsed it, was we would be able to gain more influence and cause more positive change by giving things away than we would by trying to gain control of the environment, that is, be in charge of everything. So we had started that in the early 2000s. By 2007, the message that I brought was this idea of cooperation across the private sector and government, and in particular for the government to bring its share of technical content to the table. And we had started on a massive campaign to start working in open standards for security. So if you ever heard the term SCAP, Security Content Automation Protocols, a lot of that groundbreaking work came from my folks at the time. So how do we take things like good practice, NSA guides, DISA STIGs, if you know what those are, NIST checklists, I think they call them, and how do we take those and then automate them, right? So the problem that we're having, and one of the many problems we're having in this business, is that we're asking poor, overworked, underpaid humans to manually configure, protect, and deal with things that are just beyond the scope of human ability to manage. So we need to do more things at scale, ask automation to help us, get them directly from the vendor in a more securable fashion than trying to do it in the field. For us, it's the DoD. And so that was the message that I was bringing, and a big part of that message was also, we're not just trying to foist this on you in the industry, but this is what we're going to do to ourselves at NSA. That is, we're going to break down the barriers between things like red teaming and blue teaming and product testing, and use the same standards to create information in the same form so that we could naturally move from detecting a problem to fixing a problem. So that was the message that I brought out here in 2007. It seemed to go pretty well, brought us a lot of new partners, and it gave us a chance to kind of put the case on the table. One of the lessons I've learned over this, I must be the most hopelessly naive guy in the room, but everything that I think could be solved in a year always takes 3. And I'm just learning now to multiply all my estimates by 3, and it's not because people are lazy or don't care, it's because many of these things are really, really complicated. That is, we've got a lot of problems to solve, and they're not conceptually as hard as they are, in our terms, operationally hard. If you're trying to do something on the scale of a DoD, there's just a lot of things that have to go right, everything from money to acquisition to training to technology. And you can't ignore any one of those kinds of things. So that was the message of the time.
Now, what would you say,
Yes.
Did you take any lessons away from your speech at DEF CON? Were you received positively, negatively? Did you think that you were a leper back at work for coming out? And
Well, it took some convincing, right?
Imagine.
But number one, the reception at both Black Hat and DEF CON was just overwhelmingly positive. Really, this idea of community and working together, people, I think, weren't used to hearing that message as directly from the government. On the government side, it is complicated also, though. That is, so here's a premise that I have, and I know you'd appreciate this, Jeff. I mean, the world that we're living in, right? We're all using the same technology, good guy and bad guy. We're on the same network, good guy and bad guy. Anything like the DoD, any enterprise, is now hopelessly dependent upon all its partners and suppliers, right? They're in your network, they're part of your supply chain. So the world is very deeply connected in a lot of ways. So the lesson for me that sometimes I have to work to get people to understand, is that there is no boundary to something like the Defense Department, right? There's no network perimeter, there's no boundary. I mean, we have perimeter devices and all that, sure, but the perimeter really doesn't exist in the way we would like to think of it. And so, because of all these factors, you can't secure the DoD, right? You can't make it better without everybody getting better. Mm-hmm. I mean, everyone has to get better. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's exciting and positive. But here's the real test. This is a test of kind of culture and where you come from. At the end of that sentence, I would put, comma, everyone has to get better, including the bad guys. Right? If you're really going to reshape the industry, have standards for security, improve the content, that's the technology that everybody's using.
When the water rises, even the bad guys' boats rise.
Yeah. So learning to operate, from our perspective in the DoD, in such a complex environment, I think is one of our great strategic challenges. So that's the lesson for me, is to kind of, how do we think about this differently than, there's no neutral ground between us and them, right? We're really all connected in a deep way that is just hard to, that I don't think we can extricate ever again. So, thanks.
So, in about 1997 or so, I was with Lou Gerstner, then head of IBM, on a panel. Can you hear me in the back okay? Yeah, on a panel, and he was asking, how do I know if I have an effective information assurance program? And the answer was, walk down the hall, find a random employee, ask them 3 questions. Would you know if your computer is being screwed with? If yes, would you know who to call to get help? If yes, would you care enough to call? And the point was, unless you can answer yes for all 3 questions for all your employees, you can spend all the money you want on technology and you're going to fail on the people side. And this has struck me as an area where the government in particular needs to put a lot more emphasis, not just on building the high-tech team of cyber defenders or warriors, whatever, but convincing the entirety of the workforce, and the leadership, that these are issues for commanders and policymakers and decision makers, not just for the techies, and they have to be part of what permeates our day-to-day operating procedures. So I was really encouraged to see this defense strategy for operation in cyberspace that was rolled out a couple of weeks ago, and I realized there were various critiques of it, but it does include much more emphasis on the entirety of the DoD workforce becoming more aware and more capable in cyberspace, and linking that to R&D. So if there's anything I'm cautiously optimistic about, it's that. Another thing, though, is that one of the things that's always struck me when I've come to DEF CON is the enormous amount of talent and energy and enthusiasm that's here in this room.